This is the IBJ podcast for the week of January 22nd, 2024, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. At least as far back as the 2012 Super Bowl, Indianapolis has built a reputation not just for its excellence in stitching together all of the elements of large sports events, but also for finding ways to weave the work of local artists and craftspeople into the fabric of the event. For the NBA All-Star Weekend set for February 15th to the 18th, local organizers hit on a way to put a distinctly Hoosier spin on the areas downtown that will host the most visitors, playing off of the concept of Hoosier Hysteria. Now, if you're not from Indiana, and our podcast analytics indicate we have listeners from around the world, Hoosier Hysteria refers to the state's fervor for high school basketball, especially during tournament time. Here's the idea. Create 24 giant fiberglass basketballs that would act as blank canvases for 24 artists. On the balls, they would paint scenes related to the people, places, and specific games we most associate with Hoosier Hysteria. So, obviously, the Milan Miracle is on the list, the 1954 state championship that inspired the movie Hoosiers. And there's a ball dedicated to the legendary 1955 champions from Crispus Attucks High School, the first all-black squad to win an open state championship in the nation. You'll also see balls referencing the annual Indiana-Kentucky game, the effect of Title IX on high school basketball, and the never-ending debate over class basketball. The project is called Hoosier Hysteria. And for this week's edition of the IBJ podcast, I took my trusty recorder to the warehouse where artists are working on their pieces before they're deployed in the Mile Square. I talked to several of the artists, who in some cases were chosen for their close personal connections to the schools they're depicting. We also hear from organizer Julia Muni-Moore of the Arts Council of Indianapolis about the challenges of mounting a large-scale public art project in February in Indianapolis that will only be displayed for a handful of days before dispersing across the state. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Julia Muni-Moore, the Director of Public Art at the Arts Council of Indianapolis. Thanks for inviting us over today.
Oh, thanks for coming.
So let's set the scene. Just tell listeners where we are and what we see in this cavernous space.
We are in a warehouse in downtown Indianapolis, right next to the Stutz building, and you are surrounded by 17 very large basketball sculptures, some of which are in the process of being painted, some of which are completed. And this is all for the Hoosier Hysteria project related to the NBA All-Star event.
And yeah, and some are finished, extremely colorful. Some of them are in process. When will these be deployed downtown?
We are going to be installing them between the 14th and the 15th of February. And we have very little time to set out 24 sculptures in several large trucks. And we'll do the best we can in downtown traffic.
And where should people expect to find them?
You can find them at all of the All-Star venues, so you'll be able to find them at the Convention Center, at the Gainbridge Fieldhouse, at the Convention Center, at Lucas Oil Stadium, but you'll also be able to find them along Washington Street. You'll see several of them on Meridian Street, on Illinois Street, and then you'll also see them on the southern half of Monument Circle, and then you'll see them in other places around town. There'll be one at the airport, there'll be one at the Transit Center, so as you're coming downtown, you'll run into them.
So let's take a quick look around. Let's talk to some of the artists if we can. Let's we'll just get up and go.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Who do we have here?
This is Becky Hochhalter. She's actually visiting us from Terre Haute. She does not live in Indianapolis, and that's what I love about this project, is we have artists from all over the state working.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about this? I know that you were given like an idea or a concept or an event to illustrate. What was it?
The story that I'm illustrating is the Milan Miracle, and it's the true story behind the movie Hoosiers, which a lot of people, especially people in Indiana, are very familiar with. And so this is the 1954 championship, the Milan High School team, the underdogs, the small school, coming back to win this big championship that they'd never won before. So it's kind of a real inspiring story, and it's very, I feel like it's very energetic, an energetic story. So I'm trying to portray some of that energy with the scenes that I have on this ball. I've got kind of a crowd scene I'm working on right now, cheerleaders in front, the Milan High School cheerleaders. And on the other side is a great photo of the winning team, the Milan team. And, they're all very energetic and smiling and, fists in the air and cheering. And so there's just a lot of energy behind some of this imagery that I've got on the ball.
Yeah. And I see you have some reference photographs here. I'm guessing some of the students at the time, some of the cheerleaders.
Yes, I actually contacted the Milan Museum in Milan, Indiana. They have an entire Milan Miracle Museum. And so I contacted the museum, and they were able to provide some fantastic reference photos of these scenes that I was trying to depict and was really looking for some nice crisp images of. And of course it's all black and white, so my ball is a monochromatic theme. It's kind of golds. Milan school colors were gold and black, so I've got some golds and blacks and grays going on, and really trying to give it that historic, nostalgic feel.
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing that when I started thinking about the project that I had trouble wrapping my brain around, like everybody gets what a mural is, and everyone can kind of paint their own mural. Is it difficult to paint a sphere?
It is difficult. There's a lot of challenge with the distortion. I've got a bit of experience working on fiberglass sculptures like this. I've done quite a few Coke bottles. Terre Haute's home birthplace of the Coke bottle design. So in Terre Haute, we've done a whole series of Coke bottles. So that is a very extremely distorted shape. So I've got a bit of experience with that. The one nice thing about these basketballs is that we have some really large panels to work with that give us some space to really tell the story.
But I see here, and I didn't see this initially when I walked in, you have the basketball seams to work with.
Yes.
I mean, that they do kind of create a sense of panels, but they're not square.
Yes, and each artist is handling that differently. I've kind of used them on my design as a frame on the sides. Other artists are completely, hiding those lines or kind of going outside of those bounds. Other artists have really defined the lines, and we've got an artist who's making the ball look really like an old basketball. So another artist is making it look more like steel and has added some stud details. So it's really cool to see all the different approaches to that basketball shape.
How long do you think the painting part of it is going to take?
My goal is 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
I started Sunday, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to paint as fast as I can. But I'm always about making sure that it is what I intended for it to be. So if it takes a little bit longer than that, to accomplish what I'm trying to do here, then, so be it. But of course, my ball has a lot of detail, so there's a lot yet to come.
Right on. Well, thank you. I'm going to move over next to you because this is the one that I probably recognize the best.
Yes.
This is obviously about John Wooden. And here is the artist. Sir, would you recognize yourself to the audience?
My name is Andre Parnell.
Mm-hmm. And you obviously were given the assignment of all things wooden.
Indeed,
Yeah.
Indeed. Actually, not all things wooden, and that's where I had to edit myself. All things wooden are incredible. I almost wanted to create a retrospective of his lifetime, but we pared down to a high school career. He was both a teacher and he was both a student athlete. So incredible teacher.
So what have you decided to use as imagery on the ball?
Imagery, what I chose to do, this is like a picture book. We think of wooden as like an old master. So already the style kind of harkens to an older style, kind of authentic portrait. I wanted it to be a memorial, so to speak, kind of as if you took a picture book and spilled it across the table. You know, you get his mother, you get his wife, you get his dad and brothers, you get pictures and vignettes, and that's exactly what I'm doing here.
Okay. Cool. Who are you, sir?
Well, my name is Felix Maldonado, aka Flex. I hail from the city of East Chicago, Indiana.
And this has a special meaning for you because you're from this area. What is the story that you took on?
Well, the story here is the story of the East Chicago Washington High School Senators going all the way undefeated back in 1971. This represents the story of the day that they won their championship through the visuals of that you see here with the logo, the team that went all the way, the coach that coached that team, as well as the actual event tournament ticket. So kind of to me, like what I wanted to do is I wanted to create sort of a little history lesson so that when the spectators and people come and see, they can get a little bit of a learning history from.
So the palette here is very pink, and there's a I don't know if you want to call that the background, but the base looks like steel.
Yes,
and
yes.
I'm guessing I know why that is.
It's intentional, yes, and then you probably might have guessed right. We come from the Northwest Indiana region, which is basically the steel mill industry. You know, we got all the steel mills up there, so. I just found it very fitting to be able to incorporate the region through the background by incorporating the steel mills, the silver background, which represents the steel mills, as well as the rivets that I added to the ball to make it look like it's riveted and made out of steel.
This logo is something I'd never seen before. I mean, it's a top hat.
Yeah,
with,
pretty classic.
With a pair of white gloves.
Yeah.
Is that was the school's logo?
That was their logo, and they're very proud of it. So yeah, they.
They were the Senators.
The Senators.
That makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Were you alive when they?
I was born when they won. So 1971 is the year I was born. So yeah, it's been a while.
Is this something that is still discussed in Chicago?
Not. I mean, now that we because the story behind East Chicago's basketball is that there were two high schools at the time. One from the harbor side, which was the East Chicago Washington Senators, and then in the actual East Chicago side, which is the Roosevelt High School Rough Riders. So there was two schools, so they're pretty much rivals within their own town. That eventually went away when they knocked them down and created one big school, which is now called East Chicago Central High. Yeah. So I managed to catch some of the. Growing up, I lived about a block away from Roosevelt, so I was able to witness all their the cool sports, their football games and their parades and all that stuff. So they were very nice schools, both of them. They just felt that they needed to merge the schools. So yeah.
Well, it looks fantastic.
Thank you.
Are you close, do you think, or are you still level?
I believe I'm about 65-70% done. So I got about a couple more days, but I'm in the groove now, and I'm amongst all this talent, so it pressures me to do my best and as fast as I can. So I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Great. And this is Kevin?
Mm-hmm. This is Kevin Wilson.
Hey, sir.
Kevin, how are you? I'm Mason King with the IBJ.
How are you, sir?
I am fine. And you got Attucks.
Crispus Attucks High School.
1954?
55.
55,
yeah.
Right.
55.
Chuck Mangione can go away. So obviously the Tigers, I mean, this is the first thing that you see. It is a tiger with Was that the actual iconography that they used at the time?
Oh, yeah.
It looked exactly
Yeah,
like
as a
that?
matter of fact, they called them the Flying Tigers.
Okay.
Because those guys were playing above the rim even then.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, they called them the Flying Tigers. And I figured with everything on here, this is the first thing I'm really trying to get control of. I think as artists, we choose something that we're trying to get control of. I just finished drawing up everything last night and started experimenting with colors and things like that. But I want to get control of this and then move forward.
Gotcha. Yeah, so see that, I mean, you have some of the players' faces. I'm guessing this is Oscar Robertson.
Yeah, there's Oscar
sketched
right
out.
here. Yeah. And the reason why is because I actually spoke with about 4 players from Attucks that played in the 70s. And one thing that they told me that I did not realize was that out of all the years and all the players that came through Attucks, he was the only one that made it to the NBA.
I was thinking about that last
the
night, actually.
only one that made it to the NBA.
Right.
And I just hadn't really even thought about that at the time. This is a picture of the team when they won the championship, hosting up Coach Ray Crow.
Right.
As a matter of fact.
And this picture's in the Hall of Fame, I think.
I'm not sure if it is or not, but I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah. It's a great picture.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't doubt it.
So this is sketched out over here, and you got a whole other panel over here.
Yeah, like I said, I just finished sketching it out last night. I came in here last night about 8:45. I think it was about 3:30 when I left in the morning.
Okay.
And so I like being here that time. The building talks, but so yeah, this is the championship trophy, 1955.
Okay.
And first black team in the nation to win a state championship.
There you go.
And so I said, I'm just trying to get control of it right now.
Are you from Indianapolis?
I am from Indianapolis. My grandfather, my mother, her sister, myself, my 3 siblings, and about 9 of my cousins all went through Attucks.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, and that's really with Miss Kay Clay. You remember Miss Clay? Is really where I honed a lot of my artistic skills. So she was our art teacher there, and she really
Kay Clay was?
Yes, she was.
I took watercolor from Kay Clay at the Indianapolis Art Center.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
funny. Wow. That was probably
Yes.
50 years ago.
Yes, she was my art teacher,
That's awesome.
and my brothers and my cousins.
That's cool.
So yeah.
Wow. And did I understand correctly? I mean, you kind of lobbied to do this one?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I really did. This is where my heart was. This is definitely where my heart was.
How is it going? What is it like to actually be painting on this spherical surface?
The sphere, it is a challenge. You know, I'm not going to lie. It is a challenge. But I always say we're creative people, and we create a way to make things happen, and we figure it out. You know, like I said, because these colors were completely experimental, this has got to come out. That orange has got to come out. So I am doing some experiment with it. You know, you can see my sketches over there.
Yeah. I forgot to ask, like, I'm assuming that if somebody's like, oh, I messed up, can I get another ball? That would not happen.
You paint right over it.
Right.
You just paint right over
Just
it.
paint.
Just
Exactly.
Paint right
you just
over
paint
it.
right over it. You know, because like I said, I'm doing some experimentation, and like I said, I'll feel better once I get control of that tiger.
Yeah.
I'm on my way.
Well, this is great because, I mean, Attucks obviously still exists. And so they potentially could display this at the high school.
Yeah, they could.
Okay.
They could. So, like I said, these are just the first steps, and I've got a long way to go. I'm supposed to be finished by the 27th. I just started Friday.
Okay.
Last Friday, I based it all, you know. And then, like I said, it just took me a while to get everything drawn up. And I started painting. I was so anxious to start painting last night. That's why I stayed so late.
Yeah.
And so I'll probably take a break, and I'll probably come back in later again and stay till about 2 or 3 in the morning.
All right.
And that's why we have the warehouse, is so that, you know, artists come and go 24/7. Everyone has 24 artists. They all have different schedules. They all have, you know, it's like we just wanted a place where they could, you know, follow their own timeline and their own heart. If you wanted to come in at 2 in the morning, come in at 2 in the morning.
All right. Well, best of luck to you.
Thank you,
This looks
sir.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast. in our discussion of the Hoosier Hysteria project that will be front and center in downtown Indy during All-Star Weekend next month. Here again is Julia Munimore of the Arts Council of Indianapolis. So, Julia, how did this come about? Was this something that was originally planned for the 2021 All-Star Game, or did this idea kind of germinate after that one was canceled and then rescheduled?
It was in the reschedule. After the host committee team had gone and seen a couple of different ways that other cities had hosted the game, they came back and said, how can we make this spectacular? And one of the things that they thought that we needed to do is to tell stories about why basketball is so special in Indiana when it's just a game anywhere else. And the best way to do that is to tell the stories in a way that's really going to grab people emotionally rather than just, in a social media post. I mean, and it has to be big. If you notice, these are larger than people size. And when you're confronted with something that big right in your face, and it's a story that you feel very emotionally connected to, that's going to extend to the entire surrounding event. And that's how they hit upon this particular sculpture. I mean, we talked about other things. We talked about some murals. We talked about commissioning artists to do, but the idea of having these sculptures made and making them physical, where you can walk around it and you can't just pass by them because they are obvious, and then also having people learn. I mean, most people that are coming here do not know all of the stories. They know the one that they know. They know maybe Crispus Attucks. They know maybe the Milan Miracle because of Hoosiers. But beyond that, if they're not from here, they don't know what it means. And this is what we wanted to show.
When I mentioned this project to my wife, the first thing she said was, "Oh, it's like Cows on Parade in Chicago." Is that a decent reference point?
It is. There was a time when every city had to do a big fiberglass thing and have artists paint it, and it did start with the cow parades in Chicago. It started with I've seen ponies in Tucson. Coke bottles in Terre Haute. Here in Indiana, we did bison for the state bicentennial in 2016. So there is a long history, it's new, but it is a history of doing these kinds of things. And I always joke that I thought I would get through my entire, so far, 25-year career in public art, never having to coordinate one of these projects. And here I am, and it's basketball.
It's funny how it almost became kind of an albatross, because I lived in Chicago at that time, and then for years after, and every year was like, well, what are we going to do this year? And the ideas just got sort of more and more far afield, and it just seemed in the end like more of a millstone than anything else.
Yeah, and I had thought that because these had kind of backed off a little bit in public art world, and they're actually coming back now because there's a new generation of people who are doing tourism and people who are doing events and people who are doing public art that did not have that cow parade experience where it was super popular and it was something that you had to do. And I kind of like it. I mean, I kind of like that it's but I think it's a bit fresher right now.
Mm-hmm. So what is common to each one of these? I guess maybe the real question is, what are these made out of?
They are made out of fiberglass. So they are molded in pieces, and then the pieces are attached together with essentially Bondo, and then they are coated with a primer, a very thick kind of primer paint.
But they need to be custom made.
They do, yeah. So the place that we're getting them done, it's in Nebraska. It's called Fiberglass Animals and Objects. They supply probably about 2/3 of these to projects all over the country. And it's a small family-owned business, which is really interesting, the way that they're able to turn out the volume. It is a very small operation, but they do amazing work. I mean, they produce these for all kinds of projects. And some of them, they have stock ones, so if you needed a cow or if you needed a certain kind of animal, they have that, but they didn't have a basketball. So this was absolutely 100% custom.
Wow, that's amazing. And are these perfect spheres, or are they a little bit different. You said, for example, like they're 6 feet across? Is that
Yeah,
right?
so they're 5 feet across, but at the bottom they're kind of truncated a little bit because you have to imagine the bottom of the ball sitting in the base. So they're mostly round with a little flat on the bottom. Because they set there on kind of a 3-level base, kind of almost like those baseballs, those like collectible baseballs that you sit them in a little thing and then put a little glass case over. It's kind of like that.
Do you know how much each one of these weighs?
They're 110 pounds, but when we put them out on the street, there's a tray that gets filled with sandbags, and then the sculpture gets bolted on top of that. So it's going to exceed 300 pounds when it's out there.
Yeah, so when the inevitable 50-mile-an-hour winds sweep through Indianapolis and February.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And was this specifically a project of the Arts Council of Indianapolis, or if you can just kind of tell me who is in charge of this?
Yeah, so this was generated by the NBA All-Star Host Committee, and it is a joint effort of the Indiana Pacers and the Capital Improvement Board. So they jointly funded it. And at the end of the project, the Capital Improvement Board is going to own the sculptures, and then they can do whatever they want with it. And I think what they're going to end up doing is, I believe that the schools that are represented in these stories have the first right of refusal for receiving their sculptures. And so the CIB would transfer ownership. So if Muncie Central wants theirs, if Franklin wants the one about the Franklin Wonder Five, they can absolutely come and get it, take it away. And the CIB will transfer ownership.
What was the budget for this whole project?
Altogether, it was over $200,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know the artists, I think their commission is $6,000 each, so that almost gets you to 100. And so the materials and everything
Yes.
else,
Yes.
all that gets you to a little more than 200.
Yeah, a little more than 200,000 because commissioning the sculptures was one fee. The artist fees are another. We have some costs such as hiring the trucks to transport them and set them around. Right. We had some other expenses. We had some expense budgeted for the warehouse space where they're going to be placed. So yeah, there are a lot of things that are part of this project, but the two biggest expenses were purchasing the sculptures and paying the artists.
So a call went out to recruit artists. It was at early 2023.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And then what would make an artist eligible for this project?
Well, they had to have a really strong connection to Indiana. So living here now, lived here previously, grew up in Indiana, went to high school in Indiana, those kinds of things. So we really didn't want someone coming from outside Indiana with their own idea of what Indiana high school basketball was about. We really wanted people who felt it because they were from here, and I am not from here. So in a certain sense, I don't feel it, but it's not my job. I'm not painting these, I'm here to just make sure that everybody else feels that.
Okay.
So, and that was really the only, and then from there, they had to be able to convey a sense of story with their artwork, and then also have a unique style of their own.
Yeah. But most of them, just looking around, it's sort of figurative, but very imaginative, very colorful.
Yes. And that's one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that the artists brought a sense of interpretation, that they weren't just going to take, here's a photograph that was in the newspaper of the shot that won a particular game, or here is a posed portrait of this individual who, won the first Indiana Mr. Basketball, because those are very, very easily accessible.
Right.
And what we really wanted is what artists bring to things, which is that interpretation. So there's a story that everyone knows, but most artists can find the story behind the story because there's parts of it that's going to resonate with them. And that's what we wanted. We wanted artists who would bring their own interpretation, their own history, their own sense of composition, and their own ideas of what they felt was the most interesting and important part of the story.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You would accept or look at an artist who didn't live in Indiana if they went to high school in Indiana.
Correct.
Are there any of the finalists?
No.
Okay.
No, we had applicants. They did not make it to the final 24.
And also, you could do groups of artists
Yes.
Is there any one of these or multiples that were done by more than one person?
No, they're all more than one person. I know there are a couple of artists who kind of invited people in to kind of give them a hand just on a technical basis because they only could be in the space for a limited amount of time and they just needed to, move things through. So they drew the line and hired another artist.
What happened? Okay, folks, a stool collapsed.
Hired another artist to come in and just basically color in the lines because they were in a time bind. But we really didn't have any teams in this particular group.
Yeah, it's not like the scenario that you're anticipating maybe would be a group of high school students.
Yes, yeah.
That as long as they had an older supervisor or ringleader, it would be okay. But you didn't have any.
We did not.
Okay.
We did not.
All right. And then, so the commission, again, was $6,000 for each one. Was there any effort to match the artist with subject matter?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We wanted to make sure that the artists, if they had an emotional connection, that we did that. So the first thing we did is we asked all the artists when they applied, what's your connection to Indiana basketball? How did you grow up? What's your favorite story? So we had that going in, and that was part of the selection process for choosing the group of artists. But then we went back after we selected the artists and said, here are the stories. Are there any that you feel a personal connection with, and why? So we started with what the artists wanted, and then some artists are like, well, I don't have a particular connection to any of these stories, but I do know here's another story. So it enabled us to do a matching process. And then there are some artists that really claimed one, like the artist who did the mascots story. He was like, I want to do those mascots. I feel I want to make sure that people know how nutty and crazy and zany some of these high school mascots actually are.
Oh, I can actually see it across the room. It says unique mascots.
Yes. And so we can head over there and take a look if you want, and I can point out some of the
okay, let's take a look at some of these
And
guys.
I think what's really interesting is we didn't give the artist a list of the schools and their crazy mascots. He actually did the research and picked his own. And some of them were ones that we would have picked up anyway, but most of them were his suggestion, like the Speedway spark plugs.
Oh my God, I didn't know the
here.
Speedway had
Yes,
a mascot, the spark plug.
They were the spark plugs.
Okay.
The hot dogs, I forgot. And again, I didn't grow up here, so I don't know what these are. But the hot dogs, I think that's a well-known one. The Jeeps is not really one that I know, and I couldn't tell you where
It looks
that
like a
was.
bear with boxing gloves.
It does. And so I think the artist was also inspired by not just the funny names, but when you go to a game and you have that mascot in the costume, what that looks like, because they don't necessarily match what the actual names are. So we have the Apple Boys, which is one I was not familiar with, the Cavemen. So these are all, the pioneers. These are all really cool. And he just said, "Oh, let me at this one."
The cannons.
Yes.
Is there like an ammunitions dump somewhere nearby?
I don't know. Maybe. I know. Well, one of the ones that didn't make it because I actually wanted to see him choose that one. And of course, there's limited space, so we couldn't do them all. But in Hope, Indiana, the high school down in Hope, I believe it's the Hoosiers because of jets.
Oh, sure.
And so I think that's pretty interesting. And, but the artist completely chose the mascots that he wanted.
Oh, okay. So you did.
So we did not.
Nothing
give him
was
a list.
assigned.
No.
Okay.
We just said, pick the ones that you want.
Okay. So the 24, we refer to them as stories.
Yes.
How were those chosen? Because, I mean, you get
There are
100
so
Hoosiers
many.
into a room, you
I
can
know.
get 100, most important
200 stories.
Yeah.
Well, I was on the committee to select the stories, but I did not contribute very much because not growing up here, not being, a high school basketball fan, I couldn't come at it from that perspective. But there were a lot of coaches, former players, people from the Indiana High School Hall of Fame, people from the IHSAA. They all got in a room and probably spent 3 or 4 sessions just generating stories. And then those stories were narrowed down to a list of 50, which we called the short list because there were originally about 200. And the goal of that 50 was to portray stories from a range of time periods so that like weren't all from the last 20 years.
Right.
You know, we wanted to cover the state. We wanted to make sure it was very diverse. So we had black teams, we had rural teams, we had urban teams, we had, you know,
And several women players.
yes,
Yeah.
a number of women players, and the stories that really were impactful. And then when it was culled down to 50, it went out to the public, and the public voted, and they got about 10,000 votes. And then this is the result.
Okay, so you got 24.
Yes.
And then so you assign the 24 stories, and then do the artists submit some initial, concept designs?
Yes. So each artist had to do a design, and we reviewed the designs and we adjusted them. We actually sent the designs to people who were kind of expert at these stories, and they're people from the High School Basketball Hall of Fame and the IHSAA to say, well, they're emphasizing something that, maybe wasn't, or that was something that was actually factually incorrect. And so they kind of gave some feedback that said, let's do this, let's do that. And most of the designs went through, but there were a few that had to be adjusted, and those were mostly the ones where it was a school that the artist wasn't familiar with and a story that the artist wasn't familiar with. They did some research. The archives of IHSAA and the High School Basketball Hall of Fame were open to them. Some artists did a lot, some artists did some artists did Google searches, and then they came up with these images and stories on their own to create these designs.
Right, yeah. If not that this would ever happen, but if the artist who was assigned the Milan Miracle didn't have Bobby Plump
exactly
shooting a 14-footer
exactly
from the top of the key, that would be bad.
That would be very bad. But we didn't want to play into people's expectations. But there are certain things that had to be there, and the one I can remember is the Indiana-Kentucky game. The one thing everyone remembers about that Indiana-Kentucky series that happens every year, it's an annual, it's this, the Cross-Ohio River rivalry, is that there were the red uniforms and the blue uniforms.
Yeah.
And I can't remember offhand who was who, but when the artist did the original sketch, the uniforms were not those colors.
Gotcha.
And so it was very important, and that's where the historians came in and said it's super important that one of the team, that it has to be the blue and the red uniforms, because that's what people do. And so the artist changed that.
So then the balls start coming in from the family business.
Yes.
And instead of shipping the ball to the artist, the balls come here, and
Exactly.
the artist comes here
Exactly.
to paint.
Yes, and this is very unusual. From most projects that do this, it gets dropped off at the artist's studio. But then you have to worry about, can the artist's studio handle it? We knew this was going to be in, cold weather. You can't really paint outside. Mostly it gets painted outside for most other projects. It was just so much easier for us to have it delivered to a central location and to have the artist come here.
And cheaper.
We could control the temperature. We could provide electricity. We could provide lighting. And the communal aspect of it is something that I always like to infuse in my projects whenever possible. And so this was a perfect example.
Awesome. So when did they start painting here?
They started painting the beginning of December.
Okay.
Intended to be a little earlier, but our project was delayed. There was some kind of a discrepancy with the project ahead of ours, and so ours was delayed.
Okay. Oh, and I forgot to ask. So who is covering the budget?
The CIB and the Pacers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes.
Because the CIB when
Yes.
they take ownership. So we will assume the worst, because if we assume the worst, the best will happen. There's going to be a hellacious blizzard during All-Star Weekend. How do you protect these works of art if they're outside?
They're all clear coated. That's part of the artist's job, is
Okay.
to clear coat them. So there are several coats of clear coat that are weatherproof. They only have to be out for 4 days.
Right.
It'll be fine.
Okay. And so people should not come down a week after the All-Star
No.
Weekend and say, hey, what happened to the basketballs?
No. The basketballs are going to be only in place for the All-Star Weekend, and then they're getting removed to an indoor location so that they can rest, and then if there's any repairs that are needed, that they can be repaired. But in general, they can withstand for the transportation 2 ways and the 4 days that they're going to be out there.
Okay, so they're okay for that limited amount of time.
They are okay.
Great. So have they secured commitments yet from the high schools that who would have at least first dibs on this, or is this kind of an ongoing process?
It's an ongoing process. We have heard from Muncie Central. They want theirs, absolutely. So that's the first one we're working on. But yeah, they are. It is open, and that is actually somebody else's job to maintain that. My job is to just get them to where they're living, and then somebody else picks them up from there.
If somebody doesn't want theirs, would it be in your office?
No. if it the CIB has a storage space, and so they would be brought out for different events at different times. I mean, I imagine that for the championship, that they would come out as they, as many of them remain from year to year, and I would hope that different schools would want to come out. But we're not saying, okay, you have to get here in 2 months or else we're going to trash it. I don't think these will ever be trashed.
Yeah. So, I mean, as the head of public art for the council, so there've been a lot of projects that you've been involved in managing, spearheading, and I'm sure that when you see them finally taking shape, it's maybe not exactly what you thought. What has surprised you about this, being in a room like this and seeing all of these balls together?
I think I intellectually knew how big they were, but I think until you're standing next to them, you really don't know how big they are. I think that's the most amazing. Delivery day, when the blank ones show up, is extremely exciting because you have this trailer truck that just backs into we have an enclosed dock in the warehouse. When this backs up in the enclosed dock and they start coming off the back of the trailer is super exciting. And they're just blank and white and just full of potential. That's very exciting to me.
You have to be happy though. I mean, just looking around at the finished ones, for example, and the ones that are in process. Yeah, you can't really conceive of it exactly how it's going to feel.
You really can't. And I think the other thing that's very interesting are some of the stories that are coming out. And as we talk to the artists as they're doing that, you start to hear the stories of what their involvement has been and their story of when they first got assigned their story and how they got to a design and then how they got to the painting is so unique to each artist. And they love telling that story. So I just love coming to the warehouse and seeing who's painting and just chatting with them. I mean, that's literally the best part of my job. There's only so thrilled as you can get about filing permits and, doing transportation plans. This is why I do what I do.
Right on. Well, I cannot wait to come down on All-Star Weekend with my family and check them all out.
It's going to be amazing.
Well, thanks so much for taking time.
You're welcome.
My thanks again to Julia Munimore and all of the artists who shared time for us while they worked on their projects. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are a few stories in the latest issue of IBJ I want to bring to your attention. First up, finding one's way into Gainbridge Fieldhouse on February the 18th for the flagship event of NBA All-Star Weekend will cost a pretty penny, if any tickets can be found at all. Vicky Shuey explores the forces that drive even the lowest ticket prices sky high and make private suites harder to come by for local sponsors. Also in this week's issue, Taylor Wooten explains how the fight against a large industrial project planned on former farmland on the south side of Indianapolis has snowballed into an environmental advocacy flashpoint. And John Russell takes stock of the surge in large philanthropic gifts to Indiana not-for-profits in 2023 as 79 individual donors gave $348.7 million. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.